Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven, a show about writing and publishing with your host, J.F. Garrard.
Welcome to another episode of the Artsy Raven. Today our special guest is Suzanne Craig-Whytoc. So she is the author of 4 novels, Smile, The Dome, The Seventh Devil, and The Devil You Know It, all published by Bookland Press. She also has written 2 short story collections, Feasting Upon the Bones and At the End of It All, both published by Potter's Grove Press, and the humorous nonfiction publication What Any Normal Person Would Do. Her new book, Charybdis, is due to be released this April by JC Studio Press in the United Kingdom. Suzanne is also the editor-in-chief of DarkWinter Literary Magazine, an Ontario, Canadian-based online publication featuring short stories and poetry, as well as the founder of DarkWinter Press, which publishes short story and poetry collections as well as novels and novellas from authors in Canada and around the world. DarkWinter Press' most recent publication, In the Lair of the Kraken, by Canadian author associate member Christopher Butt, debuted at #1 on Amazon's Hot New Releases in Canadian Short Stories. So congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, that was kind of a thrill to see that. Yeah, #1. Yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit about yourself, how you became a writer and how you started all these this publishing house.
It's my little empire.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been writing all my life, really. I think I had my first poem published in a local newspaper when I was 8 years old, and got my first rejection letter when I was 19 from back when you actually had to like mail in your submissions, and then they would mail you back a rejection a few weeks later. So I've been writing for a long time, but my first novel was published when I was 52. So, it took a while to get there, but I'd been, writing. I was teaching high school English and, I'm supervising creative writing clubs and things like that. And I always wrote with the kids, and I wrote a character sketch one day that I thought I really liked the character, and it kind of turned into more of a novel. And then a friend suggested that I submit it. She read it and said, "This is really great. I love it. Like, why don't you submit it somewhere?" And I did, and Bookland Press picked it up. And that was kind of the beginning of my publishing journey. So I published 4 novels with them at this point. And then the short story writing kind of happened along the way. I was, writing the books, but then there were other little things that kept coming to me, like, so I just write a piece of flash fiction or a short story, and then had enough to put a collection together and sent it out, and that got published too. But it's interesting because the bio, I guess it needs to be a little updated because Potter's Grove just dissolved. So the books are not, the books aren't available through them anymore, but we'll get to that when I talk a little bit more about Baxter House, I think.
Okay, cool. Now, yeah, being a writer is one thing, but starting to publish other people is a totally different enterprise. So how did you decide that you wanted to publish other people?
Well, I was, after I retired, I think I was telling you before, I retired almost 3 years ago. And, as part of my retirement gigs, I wanted to get more into the writing world. And so I applied to be a submissions reader for an online literary magazine down in the States. And I was doing that for a while, but I got a little frustrated every once in a while because I'd see a story I really liked, but they would reject it at second read, for a lot of reasons. They just didn't have space in the magazine, or it wasn't the right genre, that kind of thing. But there was something that I might have wanted to publish. And so I thought, why not start my own online journal? So I did. I have a really great digital marketing person, and she created the website for me. And so I launched DarkWinter Lit, the literary magazine. Gosh, coming up to almost 2 years now. We're just about to launch our 2nd anniversary writing contest. So that was almost 2 years ago, and it was really successful. I've been publishing people all around the world, in Canada, but also internationally. We put out 2 editions a week, one poem, like one poet and one short fiction or flash fiction writer, on Mondays and on Thursdays as well. And so it's been a kind of an evolution of that process. And it's something that I really get a lot of joy out of, is doing that. And sending out acceptances to people makes me feel really good. And then along the way, I started thinking, I'm doing this online journal and I'm seeing all of these great writers, and I'll bet there's a lot of poets out there, or short story writers, novelists, who'd be interested in maybe publishing through. And so I launched DarkWinter Press last summer, I guess it was. We launched the press, and immediately got some amazing submissions. We've already put out, I think 5 or 6 books now. Our very first publication, The Basement on Biela by Bill Garvey, much, tremendous acclaim for that one. He's actually a Griffin nominated right now. Like, we're just waiting to hear about the Griffin Poetry Prize. Another one of the books, The Dog Catcher, is kind of more of a supernatural werewolf story, but it was long listed by the Horror Writers Association as best new novel of 2023. And the books are all doing very well. The authors are doing very well. So it's kind of snowballed from there. So it was one of those things I thought, I'll just, try my hand at it, dabble a little bit, see if I can do it. And the next thing I'm publishing like a book a month. But the nice thing is I do it all through Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing. And that's been a real blessing because it's I wouldn't say it's an easy process to work through. It's a process that you have to learn. And once you've learned it, though, it becomes easier to do. So the first book I put out was my own comedy book, what any normal person would do, because I thought, if I'm going to do this for other people, I better make sure I do it right. And I don't want to experiment with anybody. So I'll experiment with myself. And so I went through that whole process of putting the manuscript together, using the templates, all of those things, and then putting that book out myself first. And, I haven't really done a lot with it because, I'm focusing right now on other writers. But after having gone through that, I was like, I can do this for other people. And so a friend of mine who I loved her work had said, well, if you want to try, I can be your first publication. So yeah, Cecilia Kennedy, she came out right out of the gate with her short story collection, Bill Garvey, of course, the poet, the Canadian poet. And then it's kind of taken off from there. So I've been lucky.
What are your expectations? I guess if people are submitting, like, what kind of genres are you looking for?
The genre is for poetry kind of open to anything, right? We're like Bill's poetry is very kind of family oriented, very kind of deep thinking. I just published a wonderful poet she lives in Malaysia. She's British born, but lives in Malaysia, Vicky C. Her poetry is like this very beautiful, lyrical, natural world poetry. The short story collections, I tend to look for more kind of darker psychological fiction. Like DarkWinter's mandate is to publish spooky, twisty, weird things. So we kind of geared towards that. Like I said, the first novel, The Dog Catcher, it's basically a werewolf story, very funny, tongue-in-cheek, dark humor werewolf story. I have another short story collection coming out by an Ontario writer, Cindy Matthews. It'll be out, I think, March 1st, called The Roach Family and Other Stories. And it's kind of darker, more psychological fiction, but with some humor as well. We like things, that are a little light as well. So it runs the gamut, but I don't publish genre fiction particularly. We don't do romance, historical fiction, unless it has a good twist to it, that kind of thing. So we like weird and twisty and spooky.
So what's the process like after you receive a submission and you like it, then you contact the writer and work out the details and start editing? Like, what is some of the nitty-gritty things you do after the contract's signed?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because we follow the typical process for most publishers, whereas we ask for a submission sample first. And once we've got the sample, we'll read through submissions. And, when I say we, I mean, really, it's me. I mean, I take advice from other corners too, but it's mostly me. And then I'll pull a full manuscript. If I see something I'm really intrigued by it, I'll pull the full manuscript. And once I've gone through that process, if it's then something that I think that would really fit the DarkWinter kind of our wheelhouse, then I'll contact the writer and say, yes, we're really interested in publishing this. Let me know, here's the potential publishing release date down the road. It's, it's going to be a few months, but here's the release date. What do you think? If you were happy with this, I'll send out a contract. We have a publishing contract on our website. If you go to submit to the press, there's an FAQ document that really outlines a lot of questions, because we found, like, when we were first asking for submissions, we would get the same kinds of questions over and over again. Like, do I have to pay? No, we're a publishing company where, we don't expect people to pay us. Who provides this, who provides that? We do this, we do that. This is how we publish, how we promote. So we have an FAQ document that really outlines it. And then we have a pretty basic publishing contract that we send then to the writers, and, they sign it and send it back. And then we start the process of kind of working through the manuscript. We do all of our own editing. So I'll do a hard edit first and, really go through everything, send it back to the writer for approvals. Then I have an external editor who does like a last pass before everything, and then it goes back to the writer again. So there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of input from the writer, and in the cover as well. Like we'll design the covers, do all the cover art, but the writer gets a lot of input on what that's going to look like, and they get final approval and everything. So because we want people to be happy, that's the whole point of doing this, is put out products that make the writers happy.
What are some of the biggest challenges you faced since opening your press, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I think for me personally, the biggest challenge is getting so many great manuscripts, but not being able to take them all. I think a lot of publishers will tell you that it's hard to say no to people, but I just literally couldn't publish everything that I get. And some of it is just not, like I said, it's just not in our wheelhouse. It's, maybe a different kind of genre that we're comfortable publishing, or, or it's just not something we're comfortable publishing, like people sometimes send out some things that probably they should think about maybe, revising a little bit if it's going to be out in the public eye. But for the most part, it's just having to say no to people. I always find that very difficult, but I only have so much time. And we are trying to gear towards a little bit more towards Canadian writers. Yeah. So, and of course the biggest challenge for me is that I am just one person. I really do run the whole show myself. I have some people that I get input from or assistance from, but really it's me. DarkWinter Press, I say we, but it's really just kind of me doing my thing, happily doing my thing. My very small staff. Like I said, I do have a digital media person who does all the web stuff, and that's great to have, because that's a whole chunk of time. And I do have an external proofer, which is great to have as well. And beta readers, other people who will read a manuscript and give me their opinion. But yeah.
Cool. So what are your overall goals? Like, what do you think in a year's time is going to happen to the press?
Well, my ultimate goal is to just put out really good, solid work, right? Like I said, I'm trying to gear towards being more of a Canadian publisher. I do have, submissions coming out that are going to be, from the UK or from other places from the States, but I'm trying to focus on every quarter having at least half those people be Canadian, and looking for, BIPOC writers, LGBTQ plus writers, things like that, and looking at, inclusivity and diversity as well, and letting those marginalized voices be heard as well. So yeah, that's kind of my focus down the road. So we're just up and running now. Like we really just started putting books out in June. I think the first book came out in August. So it's been a really new experience from August to February, getting this ball rolling. But so far I've been really happy with the way things have gone. I think my writers are really happy. So, they're out there promoting their books and getting great reviews, so yeah.
So you're also a writer as well. How do you balance your schedule?
It's so hard. It's so hard. Because I have a new novel coming out myself, Charybdis, which it's kind of a gothic literary thriller. It's coming out by a UK publisher, JC Studio Press, in I think April, May. So I've got to start working on promoting that and doing work. Or, we've kind of already finalized the manuscript, but I was working, I think, as I told you before, I do work part-time in an antique market as part of a little fun retirement job. I cut back my hours on that. I needed an extra day of the week. And when I did that at the beginning of this year, I kind of promised myself that I would set a goal of writing one short story a week. Like no matter what, I would find the time to do that, because, my own writing is important to me too. So I want to be a good publisher, and I want to, put out good books, but I also want to do something for myself as well. So I've been pretty good so far. I think I've written 7 stories so far since January. So yeah. Yeah, one a week kind of things. Yeah. Every time I get an idea, I jot it down. I'm like, that's for next week. In terms of like the next steps for DarkWinter Press, I recently just launched a new imprint called Baxter House Editions, and it's strictly for reprints, for republications. I had the sounds dramatic to say horrible, but it was to me a horrible experience in January of receiving out of the blue an email from the company that had published my short story collection saying that they were dissolving. And not only that, they were going to be unpublishing all of their titles. So they would no longer be available. It's like, the work that you did, that you worked so hard for, would no longer exist. And it was very difficult for me And I can only imagine how difficult it was for other people. And a couple of them I knew, actually 3 of the writers from that publishing company I knew quite well. And I thought, well, what can I do? I can launch a new imprint and I can reprint them for people, because I know how devastating that can feel to say, you know, this book that was out there and you're so proud of, it's not there anymore. So we launched Baxter House Editions. I live with my husband and I, we own a house in a small town. It's known locally as the Baxter House. The woman who owned it for decades, it was built in 1906 and she owned it for a very long time. But she was a widow with small children. And so she used to bring in boarders and tenants. And there are all these wonderful stories about her, about how she would set up the big dining room table and all the tenants and people from town would come for Thanksgiving and Christmas and all sit around the table in this like kind of atmosphere of family and friends and joy. And I thought that's Baxter House, right? Bringing people together and giving them a new home. So we launched Baxter House Editions about 3 weeks ago, actually, and just put out the first book under Baxter House Editions, the first reprint. So that's our kind of reprint republication division now for books that are, you know, really solid books, but don't have a home anymore.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
That's nice
Yeah.
to know.
Yep.
So Suzanne, you're going to do a bit of a reading for us. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're reading before you start?
For sure. I'm going to be reading a section of chapter 1 from my upcoming novel, Charybdis, published by JC Studio Press. The story is kind of a dual timeline story about 2 women, Greta Randall in the present, who's a PhD student, who's doing her research on an obscure and very mysterious Ontario poet, Louisa de Berger. Not so much known about her, but the other part of the story is Louisa de Berger's diary entries, where we do find more about her, beginning from the time she's 18 years old until a few years later. And then the storylines converge when Greta meets a kind of a distant relative of Louisa de Berger's. So this section here is kind of at the point where Greta discovers the poetry book that starts her whole journey of discovery with Louisa. All right, and I'll begin from this point here. Okay. As an undergraduate, Greta's Victorian literature professor, Dr. Weldon, had told her about the antique market, especially about the large book section. Some of it's just crap, modern pulp fiction, things like that, everything tossed in together, $5 or less. But if you spend some time, do a little digging, you might find a gem. The last time I was there, I actually got a leather-bound copy of the works of Tennyson, published in 1893. I had it appraised. I won't say how much, but well worth the trip downtown. She walked through the double glass doors of trinkets and treasures with anticipation, then became immediately overwhelmed. The building was cavernous, with aisles that stretched and crisscrossed like a Daedalus style labyrinth. She stood at the head of the first aisle, wondering where to begin. It's a lot to take in, isn't it? A pleasant, deep voice from behind her. She turned, dark eyes and a warm smile. Julian was handsome and tall, and the way his hair fell over one eye reminded her of the dashing heroes of Austen's novels. But which one? Was he a Darcy or a Wickham? It is, she replied. I was looking for the book section. He pointed upwards. 2nd floor. She stifled a gasp. There's another floor? He laughed. Let me show you. He led her up to the vast shelves of books that took up most of the next story. Her eyes widened and he laughed again. Are you looking for something specific? I should warn you, none of this is in alphabetical order. You don't have it organized according to Dewey? Shame on you, she teased, then instantly felt regret as his broad smile wavered for a fraction of a second, barely noticeable. He didn't know what she meant, obviously, but was too polite or self-conscious to admit it. No, she continued, just having a look. My professor recommended this place, said he found some good reads here. Professor, you're a student? Literature, yes, just finishing my degree, then on to a master's, then PhD, hopefully. He nodded. Well, don't let me keep you. I hope you find a treasure or two. He strode off towards the stairs. Had she sounded superior? Had she put him off? She shrugged away the thought and reproached herself. What did it matter? They didn't even know each other. But then as he reached the top of the stairs, he called out, if you do find something cool, make sure you show me before you leave. Ask for Julian. She yelled back, I will. It felt like a connection that was on the verge of being broken had been reestablished. Wasn't sure why she cared. She breathed in deeply. The air smelled musty, but it was that gorgeous must of old paper and time-worn covers. Greta loved books, loved the smell of them, the feel of them, the words leaping from the pages to form pictures in her mind. When she was a child, going to the library was a special treat. One of her earliest memories was being taken to the town library, newly built, an impressive modern structure of steel and glass. She'd been so excited that she pulled away from her grandfather's hand and ran forward, straight into a clear glass door. It was the only time she'd ever entered a library in tears, but the pain soon dissipated when she saw the Children's Reading Center constructed like an amphitheater, the steps carpeted to muffle the ambient sounds of patrons. How many glorious hours had she spent there, absorbed in imaginary worlds? And how many hours did she spend in the used books section of the Trinkets and Treasures antique market? The time passed so quickly that Greta suddenly realized that she was the only patron on the second floor. It was getting close to 5 o'clock and the market would be closing soon. 3 hours. 3 hours she'd spent blissfully unaware of the passage of time, perusing the shelves. She'd amassed a nice collection of early 20th century children's books, a Nancy Drew from the 50s with a lurid cover, and she was about to take her finds down to the till to pay when she caught something out of the corner of her eye, bound in red leather with gilt lettering, thin but beckoning. She pushed aside some Harlequin romance paperbacks and reached for the small but interesting volume nestled between them. The title on the cover was bright gold, Idle Thoughts and Poems by Louisa de Berger. Inside, the pages were pristine, as if the book had rarely been read despite the date on the copyright page of 1891. The name Louisa de Berger seemed familiar, though she'd no recollection of studying any poet with that name. Dr. Weldon had once said in a lecture that many female Victorian writers had collections of poetry privately published. Maybe Louisa de Berger was one of them. Greta would be seeing Dr. Weldon the next day. Maybe he would know more about this particular poet. She paid for the books. There was no sign of Julian, and she didn't ask for him. Later at home, she tossed the bag of children's books aside, made a quick dinner, and opened up the little red volume of poetry. Like a lot of Victorian verse, it was charming and observational with a focus on daily life and nature, and even a touch of humor. The next day after class, she approached Dr. Weldon, book in hand. He looked up from his desk curiously, his bald pate glistening. His eyebrows arched when he saw what she was holding. "Ah," he exclaimed, "was your expedition to Trinkets and Treasures expeditious?" He chuckled his own joke, and Greta rolled her eyes with a smirk. "Well, let's see." He held out his hand, and she deposited the book into it. Dr. Weldon examined it, his brow furrowing as he carefully turned the delicate onion-skin pages. You found this at the antique market?" he asked. Confused by his reaction, Greta nodded. "Do you know who Louisa de Berger is?" "I've never heard of her. I did a quick internet search, but the only thing I found was mention of her name in an old census." "I'm not surprised," the professor responded, still fixated on the book. "You'd have to dig deep for information about her. She was a little-known Victorian-era poet, a recluse. She wrote mostly about death, very dark stuff, and as far as I know, at least up until now, there was only one book of poetry attributed to her, published by a company that no longer exists. And this," he cleared his throat, "this is not it." I'll end there.
Thank you very much for sharing your work, and I wish you best of luck with
Thank you so
DarkWinter
much.
Press.
Thank you so much. Yeah, press is open.
Yeah, submissions are open, so everyone
Yeah.
go to the website and have a look.
Yep,
And we'll
yep.
put the links in the podcast notes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. It was so great to talk to you today.
Thank you. For more upcoming episodes of the Artsy Raven about writing and publishing, visit us at jfgarrard.com/arpodcast. A reminder to Patreon subscribers that there is bonus content available for every episode on the Patreon website. If you enjoyed the show, you can show your appreciation by buying us some digital coffee. The Artsy Raven is produced by J.F. Garrard. The voice in the show's introduction is Chris Gorman, and music is by Tim Moore. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe.